I actually have to say, you are one of my most favorite people. And you already actually know this about you, but
You know these feelings are mutual.
so Meredith has a really cool story. So to back up a little bit, I've done 3 podcasts now that they haven't been released yet, but 3 podcasts with people who have overcome addiction. One of them's my brother. One of them's Michael Berkland, the actor and comedian. He's awesome too. And one of them is my best friend and her husband, Ashley. And you've met Ashley at my birthday dinner.
I love her.
She's amazing. And these are people who have overcome addiction and serious addiction like heroin and cocaine. And it's been miraculous. But I had this feeling that I wanted to reach out to Meredith and see if she would be willing to share her story, because sometimes things don't always end that way, but it doesn't mean that there's not miracles in it. So do you mind kind of give us a little bit of background on what happened with you and your family?
So my oldest brother, Jesse, was always a bit of a rebellious soul, you know. My mom found marijuana in his room as a teenager, and he was the oldest of the family. He just was always a little bit rebellious. He was hard for my parents. But he was always such a tremendously hard worker and always had this incredible soft spot for the underdog and would really help anybody in the whole world. But yeah, he started his own commercial tiling company and just did great. He was really successful in that and just a really hard worker. We believe that he was clean for kind of in and out of being clean, but
Clean from what?
recreational drugs in high school, but that I don't really know if he like completely stopped doing those things, but eventually he had a back injury from his profession and ended up getting into prescription drugs.
It's the way it always starts.
I know.
It's the same with my brother too.
Things started to unravel for him, and he ended up having to move back into my parents' home. So we watched the things that he had worked so hard for sort of be stripped away from him. He couldn't own his condo anymore, and the company, he couldn't continue with the company. So he ended up moving back with our parents, but it was sort of this kind of thing that he really wasn't very open about usage, and he wouldn't ever say that was it. It was just like, no, it's like I can stop anytime I want type of thing, you know.
Did you guys know that maybe he was using it?
Yes, that he was. I mean, he at one point was going through withdrawal at my parents' house, and that was really hard for them to witness it. And I don't really feel like they were equipped with the necessary tools. None of us really knew how to go about doing it. But he wasn't ever really willing to go into rehab or anything, because in his mind it was always something that he could manage and get on top of, you know. And he had a strong will.
What was he using? Do you mind me asking?
I know for a time, I mean, the prescription oxycodone stuff, you know, all of that. But I know he had done heroin before and meth. So there was a variety of things. I didn't know exactly at the time. I was a little bit naive at the time. But then we were living in Provo, my husband and I. We had our first little daughter, who was about 1.5 years old, and second pregnancy, about halfway through our second pregnancy. And actually, back it up, he just said, we were laying sod, and he said, let me come down from Idaho and stay at your house for the weekend and help with the big sod project, you know.
Oh, nice.
How you recruit the whole neighborhood and try not to enslave them, but with moving or with sod, you're like, there'll be brownies, I promise, I'll be worth it,
like,
really
Worth
good.
it.
I know. So he came down, but we ended up not even seeing him that weekend. But then he just sort of moved in. And we didn't really ever know that he was, but he had some he was trying to get kind of his stuff back together and trying to pull his life together. He has a son that lives in Utah and was wanting to be close to him and had, previous contacts that he was striking back up again in order to get working again and to feel more on top of things. But yeah, we just said, okay, stay here and let's see how things go. And if you can, pretty quickly, I knew that there was a big change in dynamics in our relationship because it all of a sudden felt like I was raising a teenage son all of a sudden because
he was older than you.
It was hard because he was like my hero older brother, and it was hard to suddenly be like giving him curfews and saying like, you can't just like come home at 3 a.m. and if you borrow the car and say you're running to the store, like then you just leave for the day and I don't hear from you. And so also ill-equipped to know exactly how to navigate it.
Well, you're just starting your own little family.
Yes, and just a toddler and a baby on the way. So it was difficult. My husband and I would talk a lot about how to approach certain things, and also said like, you're not allowed to have friends here unless we're here too. Like if we go out of town, like because we don't know these people, and I liked to think at the time, I think I was sort of in denial about how much he was struggling at the time. I wasn't fully aware and awake to what was happening. But you
kind of knew something was going on.
Yeah. It was just erratic behavior and saying, I'll be home at this time, and then coming home 10 hours later and being like, what? Like, what are you upset about? And I've been calling you nonstop and you're not answering. I've been worried and like, oh, sorry, I just, my phone wasn't on, or just stuff that you're like, this doesn't add up or make sense. And this is every day. We're just doing this, So during that time, we were going out of town, and I really think the Lord wanted to sort of wake us up to how bad his situation was. We had one incident where, we were out of town, and I at a family reunion that he just said, no, I'm going to work. I'm not going to come. And I'm going to just stay behind. And I, all of a sudden, in the middle of all these people at this family reunion, lots of cousins, and all of a sudden I just was told, like, Jesse found your pain meds.
Oh,
and I was
just having a baby or something.
Yeah. And I honestly, Christina, was like, what pain meds? What are you talking about? I don't even have any pain meds. And then I remembered from my first baby that I had a prescription like shoved in the way back of my nightstand in our bedroom that I had completely forgotten about.
Yeah.
And was really jarred by this news that all of a sudden
This is just a feeling you had?
Yes.
Wow.
And we were and it was chaotic where we were, so it wasn't like I was even seeking anything. I wasn't,
right. You weren't quietly praying.
No, not at all. It was just given to me, the information that he had found them. And I was so startled, and then went immediately to Jason and said, Jesse's using, and he found my pain medication. And then you feel this guilt. You're like, well, that was irresponsible to still have some, but I hadn't even thought about them. I didn't even use them, And so just all the things. But I called him on our drive home and told him I wanted to talk when we got home. And he immediately confessed everything. He just knew, and I knew, and he just said, sis, I'm so sorry. Like, I just took like half a pill at a time because my back's been, but at the same time, you're like, yeah, but how did you get yourself in the position to even find them? Right, there was obviously like a desperation there.
Yeah.
So, it was just kind of this, but I really think the Lord was trying to awaken me to the reality of the situation and where he was. He also came home on his motorcycle one time, and I just found him slumped over on his bike in our garage, completely unconscious. And I'm saying his name, and I'm call for my husband, and we take him off of the bike, and he's not responsive. And we just ended up having to call 911 because I just felt like I'm going to watch him die in our garage right now, So that was another wake-up call. Like, this is worse than you're aware of. And he needs more help than what he's letting on. So the doctors said if you hadn't brought him in, and he had stuff in his system, and he just frou-froued it all and just said, he's very charismatic,
They
So,
usually are.
yeah, and anyways, so that was just those things had happened within a couple weeks of each other. And
So you thought, oh, maybe this is just his
yeah,
personality now.
I mean, I just didn't know. I just didn't know addiction the way, and I didn't know the signs of how deep somebody is and how helpless they are in this situation to really get control of it. Like, I just didn't know. And we would say, okay, we're going to have this big talk with him. But I'm sorry. Every time we tried to have one of these conversations with any kind of vibe of like an ultimatum, we couldn't do it. We would sit with him, and it was like everything just melted, everything. And we couldn't ever. We couldn't even like entertain that vibe once we were talking with him, And I really feel like that's a huge tender mercy that the Lord knew that his time was short on earth and was just softening me and softening my husband so that we didn't have to have those conversations,
Yeah, like just spend this time together.
Yeah, and just love him.
Yeah.
Just love him because he knows my heart, and that would have been really hard for me to look back on,
Yeah.
But yeah, it was December 1st of 2009 that it was the day before, that evening before, we were getting out the Christmas tree, and I had made a big dinner, and Jesse was like the best to cook for because he just threw like a huge party and was just like raving, like so much validation.
Yeah.
Just, this is the best butternut squash of my life,
Yeah.
So I was just sitting on our counter and eating dinner with us, and he said, I'm going to run upstairs and get showered. And I said, okay, come back down and do the Christmas tree with us, And that was the last that we ever talked to him, that I ever spoke to him. I knew the next morning that he was supposed to be at work by 10 in the morning. And I remember Jason coming out and saying, have you seen Jesse yet? And I said, no, I haven't seen him. He hasn't come down yet. And he said, oh, that's weird, and kissed me goodbye and left for work. And I started calling his phone, and I could hear it ringing upstairs in my house. And I probably called him 4 or 5 times from downstairs and just listening. And it felt like it would ring 30 times each, And I would listen to it, and it would just go to voicemail every time. And I just knew something was seriously wrong, that something was really off. And I thought, okay, I've got to get this baby down for her nap. I've got to get her down for her morning nap. And then I have to face whatever this is. But as I was carrying her up the stairs, I was already making funeral arrangements. I was thinking of where would he be buried, and how, and just the logistics of it in my mind. I was already doing that as I was walking up the stairs. So I rocked her, my Lucy, and those moments are forever ingrained in my mind of just rocking with her and feeling like if I could just stay right here, if I could just pause and stay in this moment right here with this sweet baby and not have to face this. So I sang to her and put her in her crib and came out, and I walked across the hall and just found him. He was on the floor, and I found him. And I knew right away that he was gone. I called 911. It's almost like an out-of-body experience that you're like, time in this situation for me was slower. And I called 911, and she asked me if I could go. Well, actually, when I saw him, I walked over to him, and he wasn't facing me, but I just touched his back, and I knew that he was gone. I called, and she wanted me to go back in and try to revive him, and because I didn't know how long he had been. And I said, I am pregnant. I know he's not there. You cannot make me do that. She said, we're going to try to save your brother. If you're willing, we're going to try to save your brother. And I said, don't say that to me, because I am willing. And I know she was doing the right thing. She was doing her job. But I knew what I knew. And I said, you cannot try to make me go in there and do this. Like, the touch of him, all of it, I knew, right? So she said, okay. And I just waited, and the paramedics showed up, and I just sat. I just sat on those stairs in my house, and I'll never forget it. Just feeling so alone. And I tried to reach out to my husband. He was in a meeting, but I was just sort of in this very surreal state of mind that I was sort of just paralyzed, and I couldn't do much more than just sit there and wait. They showed up, and they were angels. They were angels on earth. And they went up into the room, and there was one that came out, and I don't remember anything about him other than he just had the softest eyes and these tatted up, big, muscly arms. And he just held me on the stairs. And I wish I could find him because he was so tender. And, these guys have to deal with a lot. They have to deal with a lot. So he came out and said he's been gone for several hours. And then I just cried in his arms. So my husband came home, and you're dealing with so much. The police show up, and neighbors are wondering what's happening and coming, and it's just very chaotic. So the police have to also do their job and ask questions that are hard to be asked. And anyways, that whole day kind of went on as a blur. But I think a turning point for me, I felt so angry. I felt so angry at him. I felt so angry, and I felt so deceived. I felt so stupid. I really felt so foolish, like how could you not know better? Or how were you not more prepared for this? Or what could you have done? And I was so angry at him for putting me in this situation. I just felt like, how could you go and pass away in my house, in my children's bedroom? You know, how could you do this to me, Jess? And I just felt like yelling at him. I was full of rage, and felt so isolated in my experience. I finally talked to my dad that night, and I said, Dad, I'm not going to be able to sleep. I'm not going to be able to sleep at all. I will not be able to rest. I'm like in a state of torment right now. And he said to me, and I'll never forget, he said, Meredith, you muster every ounce of faith you have in Jesus Christ. Right now is your time to muster that faith.
And you're pregnant through all this.
I was pregnant with our second, and for some reason that helped me. I needed someone to help pull me out of that dark corner that I was in. And I just needed someone I loved and I trusted to just say, you know how to do this, and you know where to go. You've never done anything like it before, but you still have the tools. You know how to do this, and you muster that faith. So this visual of just gathering all of my faith and all of my inner strength and any fortitude that I've ever had hiding anywhere in me to be able to move forward and face this. It was just a really strengthening moment to me, and I felt immediately like everything was going to be okay.
Were you the one that had to contact your family and tell them what was going on?
You know, I couldn't. My mom had been calling me, and I couldn't answer with, like, talking to the police, and them. They had a lot of questions, and talking to. I mean, there's just a million people. There's like a million things you have to do right away. It's like crazy in this situation, and it's really kind of unfair that it's just. I don't know. It's just the way that it is, and it has to be that way. But my neighbor actually answered the phone, and a good friend of mine, and told my mom while I was inside. So, yeah.
This is her firstborn
Yeah,
child.
this is the little boy that made her mom. So, it's a lot, really.
Not to ask so many details, but did he overdose then?
He overdosed. It wasn't suicide. What was happening was that he was trying he had to take muscle relaxants at night because he couldn't sleep, and his back and all of the things. But then he was having a hard time working with that still in his system. So we believe, because there was a lot of different things found in his system, we believe he was trying to counter that with stimulant and to help him go back to work, because that's all he wanted to do. He wanted to be working. He wanted to have an income. He wanted to be able to be a dad. Yeah. He absolutely adored his son, who was 3 at the time.
I never knew that it was you that had to find your brother. Like, I knew that your brother had passed away, and it was from drugs, because we've bonded on this a lot because of my brother's situation. Yeah. But I had no idea that it was in your house and you were the one to find him. I am so sorry that you went through that.
It's okay. I was mad for a while. I was angry because I felt vulnerable. You know, being pregnant, you just feel more vulnerable, and you feel...
You are.
Yeah, you just feel all the things exponentially, I feel like,
yes.
you know?
Heightened emotions in every
Yes. I also all of a sudden felt vulnerable in my home because while we had been traveling, he had had people there and we had found weird things. And I felt so angry for a while, that first little while, that my anger isolated me and really kept me from being able to bond and mourn with my family members. Because we went up to Idaho that week for the funeral, but I felt like such an outsider. I felt like I couldn't sit around and cry with everybody and tell funny stories and tell his best stories. I was just so mad at him that so I knew that I needed to really quickly, I knew I needed to reach out and get some professional help. So I found a counselor, a grief counselor, because I couldn't talk. I couldn't say the things I needed to say to my parents, to my siblings. Because they were all in this mourning, and I don't want to compound with the additional, with the additional factors that I was dealing with personally. I didn't want to compound that grief. And so I just felt really alone. I just felt really isolated. And I knew that I needed to work through my anger, and I knew I needed to forgive him in order for the Lord's Spirit to be able to help me on my road to healing. I knew that was standing in my way. I met with an absolute angel counselor who literally was put on earth to do exactly, he just found his calling in life. He's an angel. And we just connected so immediately. I had gone to another person and I just wasn't really vibing with her. It can just take a minute to find your person that you need. But I was able to find him. And I knew with having another baby in the next few months, I knew that I would be thrown into another whole, everything that comes with having a new baby, your whole world is turned upside down. And you think it's maybe just adjusting to parenthood your first time, and it's every single time.
Physical, it's psychological, chemical,
hormonal,
everything.
all of it. And I just started, I just knew I needed to get to work right away, because I'm like, this little baby needs to come to an emotionally healthy mother.
So how far along were you in that pregnancy when your brother passed away?
Oh, I was right at about 20 weeks. I was right at halfway point. So I started meeting, and he, like I said, was an angel and had me write down every memory, everything, every detail of the day of finding him. He had me write down everything. And these are the things that you're putting so much energy into avoiding in your mind, that you're just, it's taking up so much mental real estate. And everywhere you go in your mind, you're bumping into it, but you're trying so hard not to go there and to stay away from that. So that in and of itself was extremely difficult, but very freeing, very liberating to go through that exercise of, there's something very therapeutic about writing and releasing. The more we try to avoid, and the more we we're not honest, even if it's with ourselves, and that's avoidance, is not being honest, the more energy we're giving it subconsciously, the more it's able to have this power over us. So by writing it down and just saying, okay, here it is, like, you can actually look at it in the face and begin to process it, because you can't do that when you're just putting so much energy into trying not to think about it. So that was a big breakthrough for me. He also had me write him a letter and tell him everything I was mad about and curse his name. Just give him a good lashing.
Which I'm sure you felt like guilt for, but
you do.
But those are feelings you need to get out.
You do, but he just, gave me permission to feel all the things.
Yeah.
I can feel guilt, but also I can feel all of that whole spectrum, the whole gamut of emotion. And it's okay.
Meredith, what do you say to someone who, two things. first of all, someone who they have a loved one, a child, a sibling, just a loved one who's suffering with addiction. And first, let's talk about that. And then after, what advice do you have for someone to be able to get through something so tragic if they do lose a loved one?
So I just feel like, we need to be careful, obviously, through a gospel lens, to not to try to put Band-Aids on very complex experiences and emotion.
Explain what you mean by that.
Band-Aid is that, and I just feel like this is talked about a lot, but not the whole he's in a better place. Yeah. Aren't you grateful for the gospel? When you're right in the trenches of the worst of the grief. And I didn't
that would be annoying to hear, to be honest.
Well, honestly, like it just doesn't make the feelings of grief less poignant in the moment.
That's such good advice.
You still have to wade through what you have to wade through. And the feelings, your heart is broken wide open. And that raw, exposed nerve, it doesn't change that. Now, in retrospect and looking back, it changes everything. That perspective changes everything.
Explain this perspective.
What you believe is put to the test so much when you have to face this experience. And it's just really put to the test. Like, is this something that you say you believe, or do you really believe?
Meaning what? What is it you believe?
Do you really believe that he is progressing where he is, and that this wasn't the overcoming this addiction the way that you wanted and the way that your family prayed for, but he is overcoming. He's still overcoming. That just because he left his body, that he is still living in every sense of the word outside of his body. He's still carrying on. He's still moving forward. And for us, the next, that I remember we were all piled onto my parents' bed at like 6 a.m. when all the siblings had gotten to Idaho. And my mom just said that morning after that he had died was the first morning that she woke up totally free from that ache of that gnawing, constant worry of where is he? Is he safe? Is he endangering himself? Is he endangering anyone else? She was free of that. So with addiction, we fear so much that passing. That's the worst that can happen. That's the worst possible outcome that could ever take place in our minds that we could conjure. And that fear is so gripping. But I know that he's overcoming. It's just not the way we wanted at the time, but it's been so merciful now, being on this side of it. He was mercifully taken home. And he had things in his life that he couldn't talk about, and that he had been exposed to, and things that he had seen that truly haunted him, that he couldn't talk about and wouldn't. And just to know that what we believe in is that they are able to progress and to be freed of some of the things that held him in so much bondage while here, and to be in a situation where he's able to move forward. And we have felt that over and over again, that he's doing so good.
You've really felt
We have felt that so much. And the reality of that, we have felt that. So just that, death isn't the worst thing that can happen to someone. I know what it's like to be so fearful of that. And for a while, I was totally paranoid after it happened, because all of a sudden you're just exposed to this vulnerability of what love is. and what loving someone means and the vulnerability that comes with it, that they could be taken. Like that reality of life. And that tragedy doesn't grant you any sort of immunity. You think that it should. You think, okay, like
served my
I've done
time.
this. So this grants me at least 5 years of
No pain.
No pain.
Yeah.
We think somehow it should work this way, and it doesn't. We want so much to control that, and you can't. But the most peaceful thing that you can do is letting go, truly letting go of that need to control, and truly surrendering to the Savior, truly surrendering to the plan, surrendering your control, and becoming more intimately aware of how little control you do. It seems paradoxical that you would feel more anxiety upon that realization that you don't have the control, but making peace with that is actually where a lot of my pieces come from. Is that
And you are a very peaceful person.
Oh, well,
It's like we're having this conversation about the most tragic thing, and I've known you for years and known about it, and I've never seen you emotional. And I mean, mostly because we're joking all the time when we're with each other. It's just how our personalities are. But like, you're a very happy, joyful, peaceful person. And I know you kind of explained, but where does that come from?
I have felt so much the reality of the Savior Jesus Christ in my life. I have felt his awareness of me and the tenderness of I know you, all of you. And I could never, ever deny it. You know, people who have loved ones with addictions want to talk to me and want to know my advice. And my experience is what my experience is. And so I just want to tell them it's okay if they don't make it out of it in this life. It's okay. It will be okay. And you will be okay. And that person will be okay. It's okay to surrender and say, I can't control this. And I can't choose the outcome. And really let yourself let go of trying to control that. It's so hard. And I can say these words, but actually putting it into practice is like just wrenching, It's so hard.
You're such a good example, and I'm so sorry that you had to go through this horrible situation, but it's obvious to me that you're going to touch so many lives because, I mean, you're choosing to be an example to other people. So thank you so much for that, Meredith.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's like such an honor to be here and to be talking about it with you. So I love you.